Hi there. Welcome back to Intentional Money Moves Live with Leah Hadley. I'm Leah, and I am so glad that you are here with me today. If you're watching live, please say hello. Let me know that you're here. Let me know where you're watching from. And if you are catching the replay, please let me know that as well. You can put hashtag replay in the comments. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, I always come back and respond to all of those. So make sure that you share anything you'd like to share in the chat. So today I want to talk about something that almost never shows up in a spreadsheet, the way that you earn. Okay. And not just how much you earn, that's important, but whether the way that you are earning is actually building the life that you want, or for a lot of you, I know for some of you, I guess I should say, is it quietly costing you something? That maybe you've named, maybe you haven't named, but that's the conversation that we're having today. We're talking about what does it really look like to earn with intention. And I do want to say this up front. I think this is really important. We're not talking about go get a side hustle. This isn't even talking about negotiating a bigger raise. Okay. And those are great topics. Don't get me wrong, but that's not what we're talking about here today. Because earning with intention, it's bigger than the size of your paycheck. And I want to be clear about that. It's about whether your work and your money are like pointed at the same life, if you're headed in the same direction. Because when they're not, no number is actually going to be big enough to fix it. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean with a real story in just a few minutes. But before I get into that, if you were here with me last week, you probably remember I sat down with Vanessa McConkey for a conversation. We called it the hiring standoff, why nobody is winning. And we talked about the job market can feel really strange for a lot of people right now. People are finding that in some cases, their job searches are going on for months in some cases. Um, it's on the other side, we kind of talked about how for a lot of companies, they've had roles that have been open for a long time and are struggling to find who is the right fit, right? So both sides are stuck and there's an economic cost on both sides. And I think it's important to recognize that, right? But here's the piece of that conversation that I want to carry into today. And I can include a link to last week's episode in case you missed it and you want to catch up on that. But when a job search stalls or a layoff hits, the cost, it's never just the paycheck, okay? It might be the emergency fund that you're draining, right? It might be the 401k match that you're not getting. Maybe you're having a gap in health coverage, right? The number on the offer letter, that's just a piece of the story. What a job change does to your whole financial life, that's the rest of the story. Okay. So last week we looked at that fear side of job change, right? The things that, everybody's kind of bracing against that week. We really talked about some of the frustrations that people are experiencing, but I want to kind of flip that over, right? Because sometimes the disruption you were most afraid of is actually the thing that makes everything clearer. Sometimes that's exactly what happened. I'm going to share a story of a couple that I've been working with. I wrote an article on LinkedIn about this couple. We've been working together for several years now, but let me tell you kind of a little bit about their story. I, of course, changed the details for privacy, but the heart of it is absolutely true. And like I said, you can check out that full story in the Intentional Conversations newsletter that I post on LinkedIn. So if you are not subscribed to that, go ahead and check that out. And I can include a link as soon as I'm done sharing today in the comments as well. Okay. When this couple first sat down with me, let's call it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the husband was really unhappy. And the marriage was good. They had a good relationship together. They had a lovely home. They have kids. I mean, in general, if you talk to the two of them, they were describing really a lovely life. But and the one area where I would say that was not the case was his job. And his job really left him feeling drained a little more every year. And his entire financial plan was built around one goal. And that one goal was, how can I get out of this job as early as humanly possible. How can I escape this job? Now, many conversations come back to that same anxious math, right? How do we, or how much do we need so that I never have to do this again, right? How many more years do I have to put up with this? And when we built the plan, it was built around that goal because that was the goal that he had. That's what they communicated, right? But I do remember kind of thinking to myself that as we were creating their financial plan, that there was a bigger cost that really wasn't showing up in the spreadsheet. But he was so focused on making sure that he could get out of this job as soon as possible that, in all honesty, they were kind of putting life on hold in a lot of ways until he was able to retire, is kind of the way they were thinking about it. But then, blessing in disguise, he got laid off. Now, don't get me wrong. A layoff never feels good, right? On paper, that can feel very, very scary. And that is the exact scenario that somebody that is so focused on, putting in the time and making as much money in as short a period of time as possible and then retiring early. That's really a big focus of protecting against that, right? But when it actually happened for this couple, it really opened something up that was very different. So it didn't feel like this horrible, horrible thing because, and let's talk about why. So yes, it was absolutely scary. Yes, we had to deal with the nerves around the loss of cash flow and income for a period of time. No question about it. But he has actually since found a new role. I want to say maybe it took, let me think back to when he lost his job. It probably took about 6 months. I want to say it might have been closer to 9. The time is kind of running together for me. But anyway, he landed a very similar role for a different company, required the same skill set, same kind of work, but a very different work environment and a very different team. So the day-to-day experience was very different. And what he quickly found was that he was a lot happier, not like relieved to have a paycheck again, happier, which if you've been out of work, I get it. Absolutely. There's a huge relief in having that paycheck again. Absolutely. But this was a different kind of relief, right? And that changed the math in a way that a spreadsheet just couldn't have predicted. Okay. And, what you find is that if you are in a situation like this, right, you're just kind of white knuckling it toward the exit, that you're giving up a lot in your life. Okay. So when we sat back down and we really looked at, let's talk about these goals again. The goal actually no longer felt like, how can I escape this as quickly as humanly possible? Which absolutely, in no uncertain terms, that is what was initially communicated to me, right? But what he found was, hey, now I don't actually mind going to work so much, right? Like I'm actually like I feel like good in the role that I'm in. I'm able to provide value to the employer. I'm getting along well with the team members and all of that. And so all of a sudden, it's the intensity of like, I need to get out. I need to save as much as possible. I need to accumulate as quickly as possible. That all changed. Okay. So what did that actually look like in terms of life? Like when we make those adjustments, what does that actually look like? Well, for this individual, all of a sudden when we met both the husband and wife and I met together and we talked about kind of their family plans. Suddenly they're talking about spending a little bit more on travel right now because they want to take time and have that quality time together as a family. And he doesn't feel this same pressure to be able to absolutely save as quickly as humanly possible. And so that allows him the freedom to be like, hey, now I can start to think about how can I spend in a way that like family is really important to me. The kids are only going to be here so long, right? They're growing up. And how can we really enjoy this time together? Now, this is a couple that is still absolutely 100% on track. They are very disciplined. They have been phenomenal savers all of these years and they're doing fantastic. But suddenly the pressure to save and invest at the level they were at before, it's just not that same kind of pressure. And I can give you many examples of witnessing this in various forms with various clients. But this was a beautiful example of how this shift, again, money hasn't changed in this case, but the quality of life being in alignment with what really mattered for this family so incredibly valuable, right? So I want to just reiterate, if earning with intention is not about the size of the paycheck, like, let's think about it. What is it really, really about? Okay. And I want to give you 4 questions that you can walk through anytime that, you have these changes in your life. And I want you to really be honest. Okay. Be honest with yourself. And the first one is the one that we often skip. What is this work costing me beyond the money? Okay. Now, misery does not show up on a net worth statement as a line item, but you better believe it shows up in a lot of different ways, right? Now, I was giving an example of a couple who were really disciplined in their spending, right? And really disciplined in their saving and investing. But I have seen very similar examples where somebody, when I shared an example in the book that I wrote, that I published earlier this year, Intentional Money, The Modern Woman's Guide to Building Wealth, Purpose, and Peace. And if you haven't gotten a copy of your book yet, I'll be sure to include a link with this. But what I shared in that book was an example of a client who had a very high pressure job, actually stayed at the exact same employer, very similar position, but for a different team and in a different work environment, and how it completely changed her cash flow, not because her income changed, but because she was spending from the stress of it, right? And so while misery does not have a line item on your personal net worth statement, it very much may be showing up in a variety of ways. In the example of the couple I was just sharing about, in that particular case, that line item was showing up as significant savings and investing for a relatively young couple because they were so intensely focused on just getting out of that situation, right? For this other example of the story I shared in the book, this is an example of somebody who, on their net worth statement, it showed up as high interest rate debt because they were spending at such a high level, and were not able to keep up with it, right? Now, the second question is, when the work changes, does the goal still hold? Okay. So layoff, maybe you got a promotion. Maybe you're in a season where you're stepping back a little bit because of your family commitments. Any of those can quietly change or loudly change what you actually want, right? But most of us actually just kind of keep running the old plan on autopilot. We never stop to ask, hey, when something shifts, maybe we want to see if the goal should shift intentionally, right? The third, am I deciding my savings rate or am I defaulting to it? I shared an example. I can't remember if this was last week or the week before, but one of our Empowered Sisterhood members shared a fabulous win. I was so excited for her. She was listening to one of our old financial coaching calls where I was talking about making sure that you are maximizing your 401k and getting the most from your employer that you possibly can. And so this particular member went back and she was like, oh, when I set up my 401k, we were in a very different financial situation. Now that our financial situation has improved, I want to make sure I'm capturing that full match, right? And so we celebrated that she went in, she found out, hey, I'm not capturing the full match. I'm going to make this adjustment intentionally, be present to my finances, and gave herself a raise without having to do anything, right? Except for increase her contribution so that she's maximizing what she's getting from her employer. Okay. Oops. Bump the microphone. All right. So now this couple that I was sharing about, they had been really grinding toward a number that made sense for a life they no longer wanted. The example of my sisterhood member who shared that she had just been in a different financial situation when she made that decision, becoming more aware and present to her current financial situation. Now she's making a different decision, right? The point is to choose it, right? Saving hard is not automatically the right answer, but neither is spending more, right? The point is to make a conscious decision on purpose about the life that you actually want, right? That's kind of that values pillar that we talk about in the Intentional Money book, making sure that we're really being intentional and thoughtful about how we're making decisions about where our money is allocated. And the last one is, does the plan still match my life? Okay. Not once at the beginning, right? We have to keep asking the question. Money is dynamic, life is dynamic, things change, right? On a regular basis, it is important to ask, does my plan still match the life that I'm creating for myself? Your circumstances are absolutely going to change, right? A plan that never gets revisited, honestly, it slowly is going to stop making sense for the person that it was built for. Financial plans are designed to be adjusted, right? And that doesn't mean that anything went wrong or bad, right? That just means that as we get older, we get clearer about what matters, what's important to us, what our priorities are. And as we get clearer on what our priorities are, the plan should adjust accordingly, right? We want to make sure that we're in alignment. So I see we do have some folks watching live. Thank you so much for being here. If you feel comfortable saying hello, I would love to just know who's here. So say hi, let me know where you're watching from. But if you have questions, I want to just invite you to share any questions that you may have in the chat. And again, that's whether you're watching live now, and I'm happy to answer live, or if you're watching the replay, I will absolutely come back and respond to any questions that you may have in the chat. So please feel free to put any questions or comments that you may have in the chat. You know, last week I shared some great resources for our email list for those who had watched the episode that I did last week. It was a checklist for those who were in a job transition. I just want to invite any of you who may not be on our email newsletter list. If you didn't get that checklist last week when we sent that out, and that would be a helpful tool for you, go ahead and comment checklist on this video, and I will make sure to get you a copy of that checklist. I know, when you're in that transitional space, there's a lot to consider, and it's so important that we really be present and mindful, right? All right. I don't see any questions coming through. I'm going to just wait a couple more minutes and kind of wrap things up. But if you do have questions, if you're in a situation, you're kind of making decisions, trying to figure out how exactly do you really prioritize what matters? How do you bring intentionality to your earning? There's wonderful, wonderful resources in the Intentional Money book. So again, I will put a link to that in the chat as well. And we have a journal coming out that's going to be really, really helpful. I was actually working on that over the weekend. It's kind of like a companion piece to the book, and a lot of really good, thoughtful exercises in it. But I just encourage people to really think about how you can really be present to making intentional decisions around how you earn. And again, that's not just how much you earn, right? It's the kind of work you're doing. It's the kind of people that you're working with, the environment that you're putting yourself in. But it's also not just you, right? When we earn with intention, we want our money working as hard as possible too. So part of that earning with intention is, how am I positioning my resources so they're earning for me as well, right? So all of these are things to consider. All right. Now, before we do close, here's your one intentional move for this week. And it's not a spreadsheet. Just this: find one place in your financial life that is built around escaping your present rather than building toward your future. I want to say that again, okay? I want you to find one place in your financial life that is built around escaping your present rather than building toward your future. And you don't have to fix it. I don't want you to, oh my gosh, no, let's just clarity, right? We start with the smallest possible thing always. And the smallest possible thing is just going to be about bringing awareness to it. Okay. So you don't have to fix it. But if there is an area in your life that is truly built, financial life, that's truly built around escaping something rather than building toward what you're working toward, I would love for you to just get clear and build some awareness around it, right? That's really where everything is always going to start. And if we bring it back around, remember last week with Vanessa, we looked at what a job change costs you. We talked about what it costs the employer as well. This week, we looked at a job change that gave something back, right? Because it made the work fit the life differently. Similar in terms of a disruption, but a completely different story, right? Completely different story. The difference really was about that intentionality. The number was never the issue, right? The life That was always what really mattered the most. Okay. So, if any of this did land for you today, I do want to encourage you, if you haven't looked into our Empowered Sisterhood membership program, that's where we're really talking about these things together, right? Week after week, we are talking about things, getting the clarity, asking the honest questions, the money conversations that most of us just were never taught to have, right? And what is so incredibly valuable, and I share with my team members so often, is the beauty in witnessing the Empowered Sisterhood members really supporting each other, noticing what the others are working on or saying, and just lifting one another up in just the most beautiful and inspiring way. So, if you're not in yet, I just want to invite you to come join us. I will make sure to include a link in the chat. And I talked about it quite a bit throughout this episode. But if you do want to go deeper on some of these topics that I've shared that are part of the intentional money method, the best place to start with that really is the book. It's available on Amazon, Intentional Money, The Modern Woman's Guide to Building Wealth, Purpose, and Peace. And I will, again, make sure to include a link to that in the chat. So if that's not something that you have had a chance to really dive into, I want to encourage you. That'll give you a lot more context as well around some of the things that I talked about today. And I share some other stories. But a lot of times when we see what's possible in other people's experiences, suddenly we start to realize what's possible for ourselves, right? And so it can be really inspiring to hear some of these stories, whether it's in the book or in our live community, and just witnessing what people are accomplishing. It really is very motivating. So if you're feeling stuck, I just want to encourage you to take advantage of these resources. And thank you so much for spending time with me today with another episode of Intentional Money Moves Live. I will see you next week. Bye bye for now.